Hello and welcome to the first episode of our new podcast, Pro Touchdown. Thank you all for tuning in. I am Chris Gleason alongside Ryan Adame, and we've got some exciting stuff to talk about this week with the NFL Combine coming up. Ryan, there's going to be a lot of stars in Indianapolis this weekend, a lot of future NFL stars, but not everyone that made it big in the NFL was invited to Indianapolis for the Combine.
No, Doug Baldwin has really built himself into Russell Wilson's number one target. He was not invited to a Combine, nor were Julian Edelman or Malcolm Butler. The last two Super Bowls for the Patriots, they've been the heroes. Antonio Gates is another really big name that never attended the Combine. Granted, he was a basketball player at the time. He is the tight end, tied for most touchdown receptions by a tight end in NFL history with the great Tony Gonzalez. If he puts up one more touchdown this year, he will have the record with 112. If he puts up 500 more yards this season, which is very likely considering his rap sheet, he will move into 33rd in receiving yards in NFL history and pass Calvin Johnson, Megatron, if you can believe that.
Yeah, so obviously it's not always correlated to be invited to the Combine and your success in the NFL. With that being said, Ryan, who's a name we should watch out for going forward that we won't get to see showcased in Indy this weekend?
From the moment I started watching film on some of this year's prospects, Zach Terrell is the player that's really stood out to me. Quarterback for Western Michigan. This last year, he threw 33 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. That stat absolutely blows my mind. He threw for over 2,700 yards, and I like what I see out of him whenever he moves in the pocket. I like his mobility. He has very nice touch on the pass, and from what I've heard out of everybody who's met him, he has outstanding leadership skills, and we all know how important leadership skills are when you're in the NFL, especially if you are the quarterback. He also had the experience working with Corey Davis, one of the wide receivers who will be taking part in Indianapolis this year, one of the top prospects in the entire group. And he had a very successful last year at Western Michigan with his only loss coming to Wisconsin. So I expect him to be a late rounder. A lot of people are projecting him to be a career backup. I believe that if he ends up in the right situation behind a quality starter, he can have the tools to succeed in the future.
Yeah, and you absolutely have to watch out for those guys coming from lower-end FBS schools or high-end FCS schools. I mean, obviously, Ben Roethlisberger, a two-time Super Bowl champion and a future Hall of Famer, in my opinion, is a guy that came out of Miami, Ohio. And Joe Flacco, another Super Bowl champion, came out of Delaware. And, of course, Carson Wentz is the newest one. He was picked number 2 overall, brought a very average Eagles team to a 7-9 record in his rookie season. So you definitely can't overlook some of these quarterbacks coming from lower-end FBS schools or high-end FCS schools. And another name I'd like to throw out there, a guy that also was not invited to the Combine, is Hunter Dimmick, a defensive lineman out of the University of Utah. He's a guy that put up some really good numbers in the 2016 season in his senior year with the Utes. He led the Pac-12 with 14 and a half sacks. He also posted 20 tackles for loss. So he's a guy that really seems that he's been learning throughout his 4 years of college, and for him to have this culminating senior season has been great for him. Now, the concern on his part is his 40-yard dash, mainly. He's got, right now, about a 5-second 40-yard dash, which obviously is nowhere close to where you want it to be for an NFL-level defensive end. So he's a guy I think people are looking at as maybe more of a long-term investment. But I think for sure, if he's given some time to develop, maybe picked a little bit later in the draft, I think he's a guy that would be worth the investment for any NFL team.
Of course, Utah is always such a talented defense throughout the country. Another, staying on the defensive side of the ball, another defensive prospect is Elijah Lee, linebacker out of Kansas State. He had 110 tackles this past year, led the team by over 30 in that category. A lot of people are going to be quick to point out his 1.5 sacks and only 2 interceptions, but if you look back at the film of those plays, you will be able to see his athleticism extremely clear. Now, he's a 6'3" linebacker, 228 pounds, about 30 pounds lighter than Von Miller whenever he showed up at the Combine. I think those are very equal measurements as to they fit his athletic build, and I think that it can point out his success in the NFL. He has a nice point of attack, and he's powerful behind his tackles with the high pursuit. I love that out of him. A lot of people are going to question his low tackling. I don't believe he gets so low, and I think that his coverage skills will be just fine as they translate over to the NFL. I predict him to be around a 3rd or 5th rounder. I don't think he'll go anywhere past the 6th round, but if he does, someone is certainly getting an absolute steal at the linebacker position.
Yeah, Elijah Lee, definitely a name to look out for. Bill Snyder coached linebacker coming out of Kansas State. Never a bad guy to play for. And one last guy I'd like to shed some light on who wasn't invited to the Combine is Chad Williams, a wide receiver out of Grambling State University. He turned some heads with his performance at the Senior Bowl in January, and he's a guy who had a really solid season down south for Grambling State. 1,337 receiving yards and 11 touchdown catches on 90 receptions. He averaged 14.5 yards per catch, and he's a guy that I understand has very good hands, and the question is around his athleticism. I'm reading that he doesn't quite have the athleticism to separate himself from cornerbacks on a lot of routes that he runs, but he's able to win 50-50 balls. He's able to make grabs, and to me, that's one of the most important things as a rookie coming into the NFL that you can have is a good set of hands, because a lot of those rookies just drop a lot of passes, and that kind of gets teams to question them early on in their career. So Chad Williams, another name to look out for. All those guys we just talked about were not invited to the Combine, but at least they were not invited due to the new rule. There's a new rule in place that bars players from the Combine that have outstanding behavioral issues. So, Ryan, who are some guys that are going to not be at the Combine for that reason who could stick with the team on draft day?
Whenever you look at that specific group, there are 2 names that are going to stick out immediately. One is Chad Kelly, nephew of Jim Kelly, and Joe Mixon, the running back out of Oklahoma. Now, Chad Kelly played quarterback for Ole Miss. His last season consisted of over 2,700 yards in 9 games. He ended up having season-ending ACL surgery after he tore it for the 2nd time in his career. A lot of scouts will be quick to point out his arm talent. However, he is very wishy-washy as it comes to his decision-making, as he's prone to throwing aggressive interceptions. I'm a lot more comfortable drafting Joe Mixon as a top 3 running back than I am Chad Kelly, a top 7 running back. In a lot of the film I've seen, I feel that Joe Mixon actually outplayed either Cook or Fournette. He ended up finishing his last year at Oklahoma with over 1,200 yards on the ground and 10 touchdowns, and over 500 yards in the air with 5 touchdowns. He's proven himself as a dual-threat running back, and I think he'll be able to find easy success in the NFL, and I predict him to be off the board by the 2nd to 3rd round, if not the 1st. That would surprise me, though. However, I would not be surprised if when all is said and done, he could have a better career than either Fournette or Cook, because I really do feel like he's that kind of talent. And although he did serve a 2-game suspension and over 100 hours of community service after he punched a woman in the face, I feel like it was just an ill-timed decision on his part, and it's going to serve as a black mark throughout his career. But if he's able to have a successful one, then he'll be able to look back at it and have no regrets, I feel.
Yeah, for sure. Those are 2 names to keep an eye on as the draft approaches. One guy I'd like to talk about real quick, Ishmael Zamora, a 6'4", 220-pound wide receiver out of Baylor. Definitely a guy with the NFL talent. He's on video beating a dog. So obviously that's not going to bode well for him. He did put up 809 receiving yards and 8 touchdown catches on 63 receptions. So he's a guy that at some point I think will get the attention of NFL teams, but we will not see him in Indianapolis this weekend.
We will, however, see his teammate KD Cannon blazing the 40. I can guarantee you that.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely a name to watch out for. So that wraps it up for our first episode of Pro Touchdown. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.